Hopefully more of you will read it in the time to come. I'm just going to try and pull this staple out, excuse me for a minute. Okay, so John Paul II in that encyclical helps us to see these bills are not isolated problems for pro-life people. They're not coming at random from nowhere, but are part of a dramatic battle between two different cultures. One of those he's described as a culture of death, which tends to reject life. He says that this is evident in the increasing acts of violence, terrorism, euthanasia, abortion, human cloning, and IVF. Importantly, he shows us that all these attacks on life are all linked, and ultimately they all end to alienation and despair. And he says that in the 20th century, it has been an era of massive attacks on life. The opposite to this culture is the culture of life. And in this culture, every human life is welcomed, honoured, and revered. Every human life has a purpose and is intended for eternity. John Paul II reminds us that the gospel and the gospel of life are not two separate messages, but one. He says the gospel of life is at the heart of Jesus' message, and it is to be preached as the good news to the people of every age and every culture. The source of this great joy is the birth of the Saviour. But he says that Christmas also reveals the full meaning of every human birth. By his incarnation, the Son of God has united himself in some fashion with every human being. This saving event reveals humanity not only to the boundless love of God, who so loved the world that he gave his only Son, but also the incomparable value of every human person. John Paul II also writes, the gospel of God's love for man, the gospel of the dignity of the person, and the gospel of life are a single and indivisible gospel. So both John Paul II and Benedict have called us to transform our culture through love into a new culture of life and love. We are to become ambassadors of life and witnesses to love. John Paul II says we are to present ourselves to everyone with humility and gratitude as a people of life and for life. John Paul II also says we need to bring the gospel of life to the heart of every man and woman and to make it penetrate every part of society. So we are to transform humanity from within and to make it new. Love is to be our distinguishing mark. Jesus teaches that the fundamental law of human perfection and consequently of transformation of the world is the new commandment of love. Personal behaviour is fully human when it is born of love, when it manifests love and is ordered to love. Christians must be deeply convinced of this, and they are to show by their lives how love is the only force that can lead to personal and social perfection, allowing society to make progress towards the good. We must be full of charity and ready to sacrifice ourselves for the sake of others. Only love is capable of completely transforming the human person, society, and indeed the whole world. All our relationships must give witness to love if we are to transform the world. John Paul II then has also given us some key insights to transforming this problem of abortion. Some key pastoral insights into the problem of abortion. He says that it's not just good enough to say no to abortion, that we must offer help. In an interview with an Italian journalist, John Paul II left us with some clear insights into solving the problem of abortion. This series of interviews was later published in 1994 under the title Crossing the Threshold of Hope, where John Paul II wrote, "It is necessary to become courageously pro-woman, promoting a choice that's truly in favour of women. It is precisely the woman who pays the highest price, not only for her motherhood, but even more for its destruction. for the suppression of the life of the child who has been conceived. The only honest stance in cases of these is of radical solidarity with women. It is not right to leave her alone. The experiences of many counselling centres show that the woman does not want to suppress the life of the child she carries within her. If she is supported in this attitude, and if at the same time she is freed from the intimidation of those around her, then she is even capable of heroism. John Paul II has also written especially beautifully to women who've had an abortion, but there's not time to say everything I'd like to tonight, but I just encourage you to pick up some of our pamphlets, and there's one especially on healing the brokenhearted that deals with that issue. So around the same time that John Paul II was writing Evangelum Vitae, a number of key strategists and key pro-life people in America clearly were responding to this call to stand in solidarity with women and do more to support and to help them. And there's now becoming clear evidence that this kind of approach does have an effect and does start to change public opinion towards a pro-life position. Around the same time too, many of these key pro-life leaders in America realised that the pro-life message had convinced many people that the fetus wasn't a blob of cells, that it was in fact a person. And yet, despite all this, many people were still not converting that realisation into outright opposition to abortion, and still women were not choosing life for their children. And so they realised that the public debate over abortion also was tending to pit women against children, with children often viewed as the enemy. And they realised too, after a lot of thinking, that in the past pro-lifers had thought that all they had to do was to convince the public of the humanity of the unborn child. And yet this research was proving that the whole situation was a lot more complicated than just having to do that. Around this time too, they found that the emphasis on babies, whether dismembered fetuses or happy newborns, tends to deepen women's sense of denial, isolation and despair, the very emotions that will drive a vulnerable woman to choose abortion. And so they found that the pro-life movement's tendency in the past to focus almost exclusively on the unborn child and not the mother tended to build resentment and not sympathy, particularly among younger women. This led many of these women to view the pro-life movement as judgmental and uncaring about them and about their situation. And this is something which I think here we see as well, that the media is only too happy to use this against us and to exploit it. For those of you who are particularly interested, and there's a lot more I could say about that research, but I'll move on because we won't get through everything otherwise. But you can read more about that research that was done in an article that Paul Swope wrote in First Things. It's called Abortion, a Failure to Communicate. So these new strategies, which have become known then as the women-centred strategies, again, they're just a type of pro-life strategy in which they aim to reduce the acceptance and the incidence of abortion by drawing attention to the harm that abortion does, not to the fetus, but to the woman who aborts. They begin with the claim that most women neither want nor benefit from an abortion, but are pressured into it by others, and then afterwards they can experience a range of negative physical and psychological effects after the abortion. So just to make that clear, they're not a compromise or a sellout to the abortionists or the pro-choicers, but are more than anything a change in emphasis. So they're being used all around the world now to try to redefine the abortion debate in terms of the legitimate needs of women, rather than an exclusive focus upon the unborn child. So proponents in doing this aim to directly limit the harm that abortion causes women by addressing issues of consent and by minimising coercion through the promotion of practical assistance to women and through to the development of better social policy.